Matthew Leversedge, welcome to Drop Balls and Big Calls.
Thank you for having me on, Jason. It's a pleasure.
Excellent, mate. And you're just coming off a round of the War of the Wings series with all the USA guys coming into town and had a pretty good result from what I understand.
Yeah, no, it was a really busy couple of weeks, as you touched on. We raced as part of the Hydrolink War of the Wings series here in the South Island of New Zealand, and we had a few American visitors come over and race with us. There was about 7 in total. So it was really cool to be a part of that. And yeah, first 2 rounds we went down to Cromwell and ran a couple of 8th place finishes down there at a track. It's definitely not one of my favourites, and somewhere we don't really go very often. But then was back home at Roadrunner Speedway in Christchurch, and was actually running 3rd the first night and ended up 6th. But the final night qualified 4th and finished 3rd in the feature race and ended up getting 3rd for the USA Invasion Series behind 2 guys that actually sort of do it for a living and stuff like that, a bit more professional than myself being an amateur. So yeah, no, it was a great result for the team. Yeah, no, it was an awesome weekend.
That's so good. What does a week like that teach you when you've got guys like that coming across from the States that, like you said, they do it for a living, and we only get a set amount of meetings a year over here in New Zealand and Australia. What does it teach you when you have a week like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you sort of, I'm probably more on the experience side than some of the other guys that are in it. It's very young over here at the moment. I mean, even it feels weird me saying that at 29, but you almost feel like one of the veterans. So yeah, it definitely teaches you to have perspective. Those guys race. One of the guys we're racing against, I think he'd done about 70 odd meetings this year before he got back to New Zealand. And for comparison's sake, I think, if I had to guess, I'd done 1 full meeting before they got here, and then if you count the last season, maybe another 10 or 12 events. Yeah, I think you just got to have perspective, and you're probably a bit more focused than probably what you would be, any other night. Not to say that you sort of go into any other meeting with less focus, but yeah, I'd say you're a bit more on your game and try and leave no stone unturned. And yeah, like I said, I think just having a bit of perspective, it's a great opportunity to be able to race against those guys and obviously try and show your own talent and your own team's capability. But yeah, no, it's an awesome thing to be a part of. The intensity definitely ramps up a notch.
That's so cool. And it sounded like you were sort of a last-minute decision to go down to Cromwell.
Yes, yeah. So we had a few car issues. So we had one more, what you call local show. That was the week of Cromwell, and we couldn't get the motor to run, and we had a lot of issues. And we had a long night on the track on Saturday, and then we actually went out to a place called Ellesmere on the Sunday to try and get it going. And we still had no luck. So by the time we got to Sunday night, I was like, we're gonna miss Cromwell and try to focus on Rapuna. Which would have been detrimental to our season because, we plan on following the full 10-round War of the Wings series. So to lose 2 rounds, it basically takes you completely out of contention. And then you're back to sort of just picking and choosing what you can and can't do. So it was about Tuesday. I think we had our podcast booked for the Wednesday. And I said to you, I was like, Tuesday, yeah, no, it's a last minute decision. We're going to go down there and try and make it work and try to get some points. So yeah, no, very last minute decision, but well worth it. Went down there and ran 2 8s, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you consider the competition and the fact that I hadn't been there in about 5 years, I felt like it was a solid weekend for us.
Totally. And, vital points across a fairly long season as well. So well worth it. But I kind of feel like we need to tell the audience a little bit about you. I'm lucky enough to have known you since we're both little fellas, really. So I'm feeling really old when you're saying you're 29. But who is Matthew Leversedge for those that don't know you?
Yeah, so yeah, obviously, like you said, my name's Matthew Leversedge. I've been driving race cars since I was about 5 years old. I started in cadet go-karts at 5 and raced those for a couple of years, and then transitioned to dirt track racing at 8 and ran quarter midgets from 8 to about 15, and then transitioned to 3/4 midgets, which was ages 15, 18, and then transitioned to sprint cars at 19. I think it's coming up about 10 years that I've been racing sprint cars. And as you'll know, my family history in Speedway is pretty long. My father raced, my uncle raced, and both grandfathers raced. So yeah, it's been all I've ever known. It's been sort of all I've ever wanted to do. So yeah, it's been, like I was telling someone the other day that this is year number 24 or something, racing some sort of car. So it's sort of all I know. So I think to myself, well, that's a long time. Maybe it's time for a little break. But yeah, no, the passion's still there for now, and just trying to make the most of it while I can.
So good. Yeah, you really had no chance, did you?
No, no chance at all for better or worse. So I think some days I think, yeah, there'd be a lot better sports to be a part of, because when racing gets you down, it really gets you down, and yeah, but it's definitely taught me a lot of life lessons and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's so good. What is some of your earliest memories? Like, do you remember as far back as those cadet go karts? What was sort of your initial memories of getting into racing?
Yeah, so my first initial memories would be sitting up on the bank at Ruapuna Speedway as a very young child. Couldn't remember what age, but it'd probably be around that 5 or 6 mark, watching my uncle race. So my uncle raced competitively throughout the South Island back in, yeah, probably the mid 90s to mid 2000s. So that's probably my earliest memories, and thinking that I'd love to do this and love to race sprint cars one day. But obviously it was just a pipe dream back then. But yeah, I have some memories of cadet go karts, winning a couple of races in the wet. I'll be honest, I wasn't the best tarmac karter. It definitely wasn't for me. But yeah, winning a couple of races in the wet, and getting up those early Sundays to spend a whole day at the track, and a few away trips with my father and stuff like that. And looking back on they're good memories to have. And usually the same with quarter midgets, just the weekends away, racing at tracks throughout different. And yeah, so that's probably the earliest memories. And it's interesting because I don't feel like we're at a young age. At a very young age, I didn't really show probably the level of talent that people probably, would expect if they saw the transition through the years, and sort of, where we are now.
So it felt like a bit of a slow burn for you.
Yeah, I'd say so. Like probably the first 3 or 4 years, I think it wasn't until I was about 11 or 12 that probably started showing that, oh, yeah, no, this kid can do this, and it's probably got a little bit of talent and stuff like that. But yeah, early on, I think I probably was just out there making up the numbers, and my dad was probably wondering why we were bothering with all this time and effort.
Yeah, sure. And when do you think it went from, oh, this is fun to this is actually a real big part of my identity now and what I want to do long term?
I would say that's a great question. I would say probably around 17, I would say around 17, 18. That was when I won my first big TQ midget race. I won the New Zealand Grand Prix in Nelson. That probably gave me the belief that, I felt like I could compete, at a competitive level, and potentially race something like a sprint car one day. It still seemed like a big pipe dream, but I think back then that was what sort of ignited the fire even more. That I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do long term, and I want to chase opportunities to race something bigger and stuff like that. But yeah, it wasn't until quite late on, I would say, considering I talk to quite a few quarter midget kids at the moment that are out at Ruapuna, and they've got big dreams from day one, which is cool to see. But yeah, I'd say I didn't really have those. Probably, yeah, didn't see it until I started achieving some success, and getting closer to that age where it became more of a possibility.
Talk us through that weekend in Nelson, because yeah, obviously that's a pretty pivotal moment for you, and obviously changed the course of things for yourself. Talk us through that New Zealand Grand Prix.
Yeah, I remember it like it was yesterday. Even though I had to pinch myself, but it's 12 years ago. So yeah, no, it was a good weekend. We had a bit of car speed that year with the South Island Championship about a month before, and blew a motor up running second. And I remember that left me feeling really distraught because that was going to be my first podium finish at a Speedway New Zealand recognised event, and we went back for the GP. It was a five heat format, a 2 heat qualification to get through to the actual final 3 heats. It was back then they decided over points, which they don't do now because it leaves a few too many issues when people get tied on points and runoffs and stuff like that. So I remember the 2 qualifying heats, which didn't really do anything amazing, and thought, okay, we're in the show. That's a good start. There's a lot of good cars and a lot of good drivers. Won the first heat off the front row, which was behind a guy called Dylan McGregor, who was New Zealand champion at the time. I thought, wow, if I can hold off him for 12 laps, that's probably, or 20 laps, I think it was 20 laps at the time. I thought that's probably, my achievement of the night, to hold off the New Zealand champion for 20 laps. And it wasn't until the second heat, and I'd say that it was probably the big moment. I went from grid 12 and passed a lot of really fast cars and ended up winning that heat. And if you asked me at the time, I really don't know how it happened. I was sort of pinching myself at how fast we were that night. And I thought, holy moly, we're with a chance to to podium. Wasn't even thinking about winning. I was like, we're a chance to podium. Went out for the final race, was starting from grid 20. Obviously, you have a front, middle, and a back, depending on the first grid draw you pull, and ended up going 20th to 5th, and bounced off the wall a couple of times, which I had a couple of friends that like to remind me of that night that they couldn't believe that it was me driving that car. So I went 20th to 5th and ended up winning the overall championship by about 6 points, which was worked out to be about 6 positions. So it was quite a sizable win, and yeah, it just felt like a blur. I guess I compare it now that I'm a bit older. I'd say you were in flow state. Everything just felt easy and stuff like that. And now I know, sort of what that's been like in the sprint car when you have those nights where everything's clicking. It just feels like you can't do any wrong.
That's so good. Oh, thanks for recapping that. Yeah, it seems very vivid in your mind, which is really cool. And I have to ask, there's this nickname that keeps floating around on social media every now and again, and I think it's your brother-in-law's handiwork. But where did the nickname Broadfield Bullet come from?
It's funny you bring that up. So how that came about was my brother-in-law was saying, "Oh, you don't really have any like cool nicknames or anything like that. Like some people have. There's a few good nicknames that float around Speedway and stuff like that." And he's like, "Oh, I'm going to start calling you the Broadfield Bullet." And I laughed. I thought, there's no way this catches on at all. Like this is the most stupidest thing I've ever heard. So obviously you got the Broadfield part because that's where I live. So I live in Broadfield, and I guess the Bullet. He just thought that that sounded cool, and then little did I know, he just started commenting it on all my Facebook pages, Facebook posts. And the track commentator at Royal Puna, AJ Batt, decided, oh, well, I'm going to try run with it and start saying it. And I honestly did not believe it when I heard it for the first time. But last season, I just cracked up laughing because I thought, oh my goodness, this is a hell of an achievement by Cameron to get the commentator actually to start saying it. And now he says it quite regularly. I
can imagine he's pretty filthy. It's not on your merch yet, though.
Yeah, he keeps saying to me, I'll have to start paying him royalties if we bring out merch with the name on it. So, hey, maybe there's an opportunity there for some different kind of merch with it on there.
Oh, amazing. So longer term sprint car racing was always the pinnacle for you, was it?
Yeah, I think like any kid that grows up watching dirt racing, I had pipeline dreams of thinking that, maybe NASCAR was a possibility. However, looking back, you can see that, that was never going to happen for multiple, reasons. But yeah, once I realized that, how cool sprint car racing was, and especially now, even at 29, like people ask me, oh, do you want to race anything else? I just want to race sprint cars, and I just want to get better at driving sprint cars. If I can keep doing what I'm doing now, I'll be very happy. But yeah, as long as I can remember, it was either midgets or sprint cars. Midgets, probably when I was in TQ midgets, it seemed like a more natural progression. But watching my uncle and the fact that my dad raced sprint cars, to me, there's just nothing like a 14 sprint car. They're just so cool and wild. I love the way they race, and I couldn't see myself doing anything else.
Yeah, I was going to say it's quite a I guess a non-traditional route that you took, going from a TQ to a sprint car. A lot of people would go through that, the midget car and then into the sprint car. Or what drove that decision in the end?
Yeah, it's an interesting point because, like you said, you're going from a non-wing car to a wing car, and they race totally different. So at the time, obviously racing TQs and stuff like that, I had dreams of racing. Eastern Springs was sort of at its peak, and they had the International Midget Series and stuff like that. I thought, oh yeah, I definitely want to be a part of that. That would be a natural progression from TQs. And then being from the South Island, midgets have never really been a big class down here, and a very competitive class. At the time I was coming through, whereas sprint cars just seemed like a much better option, at the fact that they have, when I first joined the War of the Wings series, was in as probably, I don't know how many years, but it was an established series at that time. And the fact that, we're still running it, nearly 10 years later. It's just a lot more established, a lot more competitive in the South Island. It's easier to be, a South Island team racing sprint cars, and we get to race all the big shows. A lot of the Royal Puna Speedway shows are all based around sprint cars, and sprint cars seems to put bums on seats and, brings good attendance. So yeah, it just seemed like a more natural progression, and believe it or not, in New Zealand, sprint cars are probably a bit more cheaper than midget racing. Midget racing is the costs are pretty huge, and you sort of need the best of the best to be competitive. Whereas a sprint car, I think you can do more with less, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. But before we get to that jump to sprint cars, I want to go back to 2015. You mentioned that the 2015 New Zealand TQ title and also the 2017 New Zealand Sprint Car Championships is really tough moments. But maybe we go back to 2015 to start with. Talk us through the New Zealand TQ Championship. Why was it such a defining moment in your life?
Yeah, it was actually probably the whole reason why my sprint car career started, and I haven't touched on this publicly probably ever, but yeah, we had a New Zealand TQ Championship at Greymouth, back then, and we had a really good weekend. It was over three heat race, three qualifying final points, similar to the New Zealand Grand Prix the year before. Had a really good run, ended up finishing second overall on points. And then the guy who actually won it got relegated for a pole line pass. So obviously in speedway racing, you're not supposed to cut the pole line and stuff like that. So he got given a 2-spot relegation after that final heat, which actually propelled me to first overall. And it was a bit of a hollow feeling because on the flip side, I was stoked. We're finishing top 3 regardless, 1, 2 or 3 NZ. It was a childhood dream to run one of those numbers in a class. And but then on the other hand, when they said that, he got relegated for a couple of pole line passes, it was like, okay, well, the rules are the rules. I didn't do any pole line passes, so we finished first overall. Unfortunately, there was a bit of discrepancy with the official that weekend on how they filled out the paperwork, and it became a literal nightmare for the next 6 months or so. The person who finished first and then got relegated to second decided that they would appeal it. So I went to sort of like a court of appeal with Speedway New Zealand, and so I ended up running 1 NZ on the car for the rest of that season, and then technically lost the title in about June, July that year during the off season, and got put back to 2 NZ. So yeah, it was a stressful few months for, I think I was 18 at the time, didn't have a lot of life experience, wasn't really built to probably go through it. I felt like I got slammed for what had happened, even though it was through no fault of my own. I just went along with what they said at the time, and they said he got relegated. So, you're now the New Zealand champion. And, as you can imagine, you tell any, kid that they're now the New Zealand champion, they're going to be pretty happy. And then it was about a couple of weeks later that there's a chance I'm going to lose this. There's a chance that, my name's going to get caught up in it. And it just felt like a bit of embarrassment losing it in about June, July that year. And then that's what I literally at that point said, I don't want to race TQ midgets anymore. I don't want to be a part of this division because it seems like there's always drama around decision making and stuff like that. Either I make the step up to another class or I, essentially call it a day, and that was it for my racing career. And I was lucky enough that, my parents were on board with the idea of going to do something else, and we bought our first sprint car later that year, and been doing sprint cars ever since.
Yeah, that's heavy, man. I didn't actually realize that context. Like you said, it hasn't sort of really been out in the public frame.
No, it's something that, I still get people who come up to me and go, oh, that New Zealand TQ Championship you won. I sort of just half smile and sort of change the subject because I'd say for a long time it was a bit of a touchy subject. Now, happily talk about it. Life goes on. 1, 2 NZ to me now doesn't really mean much. It is what it is. We got to celebrate on the night, regardless of whether it was 1 or 2 NZ, and I'm really proud of everyone involved in our team at the time to get that result. And now I can look back on it with a bit more happy memories than what I did at first.
Oh, that's good, mate. Yeah, at least you've had that reflection, and yeah, you got to step up into a great class. So yeah, obviously your parents were super supportive, and it's certainly not cheap to go sprint car racing. So that must have taken, big sacrifice from your family to go down that avenue.
Yeah, it did. It was, like we bought a very budget car at the time, probably the cheapest possible sprint car you could buy at the time, and went out there and ran that first season with next to no spares. Yeah, like I look at all the gear we have now on our race team, I'm really proud looking back at the race team we have built now to this day with the equipment we have and the spares we have and how we operate. Because the way we did 10 years ago was always pretty funny looking back. Like I said, we probably had 1 spare right rear wheel, no spare top wing, 1 spare front wing, no spare front end, no spare diff, no spare anything, like it was go out there and finish races. And we ended up actually finishing 4th in the War of the Wings that year. So, it was really cool, and actually won a couple of features. finished second in the New Zealand Grand Prix, all in our first season. And yeah, it felt surreal. I think it definitely taught me how to race with less, with no spears, how to finish races, how to get through events, without putting yourself in harm's way.
Did you feel a lot of pressure?
No, I don't think so, because I think at 18 you're just very naive. You just don't realize. If I look back now at 29, I don't know how I managed to race with that amount of equipment and being that sort of not unorganized, but unprepared. But I think the beauty was I didn't know at the time when I was 18 what I was getting myself into. I was
Yeah.
thinking, wow, we're racing sprint cars. This is cool. We might not be racing next week if we tear up some gear, but hey, this is cool. We're racing sprint cars. We managed to get through that year pretty well unscathed until the end of that year.
That's so good. So another key event that you mentioned as a defining moment in your life was the 2017 New Zealand Sprint Car Championships. Only a couple of years in the class at this point. What about that event sticks out for you at this point?
Yeah, sort of looking back there, 2015, 2017, it sort of definitely went through the ringer a bit in a short space of time. So and that was the first New Zealand Sprint Car Championship I entered. It was at home at Ruapuna Speedway. Yeah, and it was a great weekend for us. Ended up qualifying fourth for the final, I think, third or fourth for the final, second row. It was an unbelievable, achievement for our team and stuff like that to qualify. Second row, be a part of the four wide salute for a New Zealand Sprint Car Championship. And that was about as good as it got because we got to the final, and I think it was about lap 5 or 6. I made a pass for the lead, and we made contact with the leader, who was arguably the hometown hero at the time. Two local Christchurch lads going at it, and yeah, made contact, and it's probably a 50-50 move. Yeah, you could probably blame either of us for it looking back, but unfortunately, being the rookie that had just come into the class, I got all the blame and got a bit of the hate for sort of taking out the local hero at the time and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, it was a tough weekend. It sort of taught me how brutal the sport can be, the brutal reality of social media, and how everyone can have an opinion, even if it's not warranted or if it is justified. So yeah, that was a tough moment. I hadn't really been through anything like that at the time. So yeah, went through that, and that was another moment where got to the point where I was pretty keen to call it a day and walk away from the sport, thinking, I don't really want to be a part of this. In my head, yes, it was a 50-50 move. I felt like it wasn't my fault, and I still believe that to this day. But the fact that everyone else can have an opinion based on it really thought, what's the point in carrying on with this? I don't know if I really want to open myself up to this kind of slander, and you do see it in all sports now, the 8 supercars, all that sort of stuff, the whole no social hate and stuff like that. I think it's definitely gotten a lot better.
Yeah, so the backlash was quite fierce.
But yes, it was very fierce. And it probably carried on for a good, I'd say, 12 months to 2 years afterwards. I think if you ask some people, they would still hold me in not a nice light because of that one incident. Yeah, it definitely sort of stuck with me for quite a while afterwards as well.
It's strange because certainly from my observation, the speedway community seems quite close knit, and a lot of people seem to have each other's backs. But yeah, there's I guess an underlying tone there, particularly when things like that happen.
Yeah, and I guess it's like anything, depending on what side of the fence you root for. It's no different to watching an NRL game, and I know what it's like. I'm a diehard Manly supporter, and they might get robbed. They might get robbed out of a call, and I'll think to myself, oh yeah, we were definitely robbed, and then I'll be watching another game, see the same call happen, and go, oh no, I don't think it was that bad. It's just the way we are as people. If you root for a certain driver or you root for a certain team, you're definitely looking at through those goggles. And I think that was the same thing about that incident. I think a lot of people saw it for what it was, just a racing deal that, that didn't work out. It took us both out of contention. So it's not like that's what I was trying to do. But yeah, that the one driver that I did have the run in with probably had the most loyal, passionate fan base at the time. So out of all the people in the field to have a run-in with, that was probably the worst person to have a run-in with at that time.
Yeah, and that sucks. And I'll forgive you for being a Manly fan. That's okay. How was it getting it back in the car in the weeks following that, particularly when the heat was on?
Yeah, it was probably lucky that I think we raced about 3 or 4 days later for a Gold Cup at Ruapuna again. So yeah, and had another good night going. Actually passed for the lead in that and lead about 7 or 8 laps, and then unfortunately spun up and got collected. So I think a few people would have thought that there was a bit of karma involved there. But yeah, it was tough, but I was lucky that I had a lot of good people around me that had my back and stuff like that. I think in times like that, you definitely see the people who have got your back no matter what, and the people around me kept me in good spirits and said, you can't. And they were dead right. You can't let that define you and stuff like that. People will get over it at some stage and move on. And yeah, we carried on the rest of the year, and obviously, that was year two, and now I'm still racing 7 or 8, nearly 9 years later. So, yeah, what they did was really appreciated.
And you had a bit of redemption a couple of years back in 2023 when the title returned to the hometown, finishing third.
Yes, yeah. So that was it was supposed to be 5 years later, but obviously COVID happened, which pushed it out a year. But yeah, we had a great weekend. We were actually having probably up until that point, I was probably having the worst season that I'd had in sprint cars. Just nothing was really going right. Was getting caught up in a lot of accidents. Was probably making a lot of mistakes. Had too much pressure on ourselves, and sort of got to the title and sort of flew under the radar. I don't think anyone was really expecting us to have a great weekend based on, and rightfully so. We had a ton of bad performances, and I think before the title, we had only completed one whole meet, like every lap. All the other meetings would dropped a heat race or DNF the feature or had issues. So yeah, went into that weekend with no expectations and thought, let's have some fun, and ended up qualifying third on points for the final after the 5 heats. It felt very similar to 2017, second row start, and was thinking, oh yeah, here we go. Let's see what we can do. And ended up dropping back to about 6th or 7th in the main race, and sort of thought, oh, this is not good. We're sort of going backwards. Managed to get rolling again. Had a few yellows, was able to reset and drove back up through to third and finished third behind, two of the best in the country. Still to this day, and got the 3NZ, and yeah, it was an epic moment. I actually said to someone after the race, it felt like a lot of redemption for 2017, and everything that sort of had gone through to get to that point. Yeah, I remember that whole day like it was yesterday. It was arguably, the biggest achievement of my racing career, and obviously got to have 3NZ on the tail tank for 12 months.
Yeah, incredible. Now, like a lot of us post Christchurch quakes, you moved away and moved to Auckland. I think just from a distant observation, it had a big effect on your racing career. But the early stages of moving up there was quite challenging from you, from what I understand.
Yes, yeah. So that was after my first sprint car season. Yeah, back in 2016. So yeah, made a last minute decision to move to Auckland. Yeah, and to move to Massey University to study a Bachelor of Communications Marketing, which I ended up completing. Yeah, it probably wasn't for the right reasons at the time. Done what most people have done, and followed yeah, girlfriend at the time up there, and then yeah, got up there, and obviously our relationship didn't last long, and that made that year tough. Living away from home, navigating new things for the first time, and then that was what led to the decision to start racing at Western Springs, because I was going to be spending so much time in Auckland, and that's sort of what kick-started my. I think we worked out the other day that it's about 8 straight years racing at Western Springs on a very full-time basis. It led to leading some really key people that are still working with us now. My crew chief Scott, who still works on the car now, that's how I met him, and his father, who have been very influential, in my racing career and in my life and stuff like that. And yeah, led to some good moments, some wins at Western Springs, and a lot of fun over the years. But yeah, 2016 was yeah, it was a year of first, moving away from home and navigating all things that came with that. Looking back, it was a very pivotal year that sort of could have made or broken everything, I think.
Yeah, you came out the other side for the better. I guess for me, growing up, Western Springs was the pinnacle in New Zealand. That the history that place has, and the level of competition up there was completely different to what obviously we had down in the South Island there. How did you find that, and do you feel it really raised your game as a driver?
Yeah, it definitely 100% raised the level as a driver. It was sort of the place to be. If you wanted to be a good race car driver, you needed to race at Western Springs. You had to be battle hearted. And it's sort of a place where you go and get your teeth kicked in a few times before you learn how to how to race properly and how to be fast on all types of racetracks. And yeah, it's just another step up, when you're racing against guys like Michael Pickens and Jonathan Allard on a week out basis. It just teaches you things. You learn so much racing with them. It makes you push yourself harder. Your race car's got to be good. Your preparation's got to be good. You just learn so much. It's just a whole nother world. At that time compared to what the South Island was. Now it's sort of flipped over, believe it or not. The South Island has sort of got that intensity now, especially at the moment, with the amount of good cars and the amount of good teams and the amount of good drivers coming through. You've got to be on your game every week if you want to run up front. Otherwise, you're going to go backwards pretty fast.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. That was another thing I was going to bring up. Like, I think across most classes in the South Island now, like the categories are exploding with more drivers now, and the quality of competition is better. It seems the crowds have returned as well. Like, I remember before I left, Rapuna in particular was on its knees, man. I think Springs Promotions had just left and they were in between promoters and there wasn't a lot of money around. And yeah, it seems to be now like the stands are pretty full again, and the quality of the racing is really good.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Like I remember the exact time period you're talking about, for a few years there. And that's why we went to race at Auckland. Arguably, there was a lot of nights at Ruapuna where there was only 8 to 9 sprint cars around. And, that's why, we raced TQs. The TQs probably had the best car numbers out of any class for a bit of a period there. So, yeah, it was just a very bad patch, I guess, for South Island sprint car racing. There just wasn't a lot happening. And I think, especially the sprint car side of things, the War of the Wings series has definitely helped propel the sport to new heights down here. The few key people involved in that. And then the same with Ruapuna. I think they got the right people at the right time who see the value in marketing and social media and promotions and stuff like that. And I think that's where it sort of had that snowball effect that now it's arguably, arguably the best track in the country at the moment in terms of promotion and facility and the surface and the level of racing you actually get to see there. But yeah, if you had told me 5-6 years ago that, we'd be where we are now, I said, that's a pipe dream that I can't see happening anytime soon. Yeah, exactly. Like you said, there's a huge involvement in all the classes now. And the other thing that's cool to see to come in is the amount of young girls getting into Speedway. It's awesome to see, especially in TQ midgets and quarter midgets. There are so many young girls racing Speedway right now. And I think it's really cool to see that, it's becoming a much more gender sort of neutral sport, if you will. And we don't currently have any female sprint car drivers in the South Island at the moment, but I don't think it'll be, too long before we start seeing more females in sprint cars, which I think is cool to see. It's good for the whole family. It's really a family sport, and I think that's what it shows.
Absolutely. And yeah, in particular, your team's very much part of that. You've got your whole family backing you in there on your team, which is really cool to see. And that's what I've seen across Speedways circles for many years. It's really cool to see. And yeah, absolutely. The female participation, I think, brings a whole new dimension and a whole new audience to the sport, which is fantastic. Now, when we were talking previously, obviously in sport in general, mindset's such a huge component of what you do as an athlete. You've said mental health is something you don't talk about much, but think about often. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it's probably just, I think you see, today it's probably it's less taboo, if that makes sense, to talk about mental health. It used to be the whole, just get some cement into you and harden up sort of thing. I think it's, a lot more spoken about. I just noticed for me personally, especially as I've gotten towards my late 20s, you just realize how important your mental health actually is, and doing things that, put you in a good headspace so that, you're able to be not only successful in a race car, which obviously I love to do, but just successful in terms of your career, and in your family life and stuff like that. If your mental health is not in a good place, you're probably not treating people the best. So yeah, I'd say that's something that I think about regularly, but probably don't speak about as much as probably what I should. With mates and friends and family and all that sort of stuff. I think everyone's always going through something. So the more we open up those conversations, I definitely think we can save a few lives and definitely help more people.
And how do you find these sort of talking points within motorsport culture?
Probably terrible. If I'm honest. I think it comes back to social media as a driver. I've definitely seen it firsthand, experienced it firsthand. A lot of people jump on and have an opinion about a driver, if they make a mistake or they might accidentally take someone out, or hey, they might not have had a good run. You jump on Facebook and you see some random Joe blog ripping them a new one about how they're not very good, or they might be out of control. You just see a lot of comments. And, as the old saying goes, the best thing about social media is that everyone can have an opinion, and the worst thing about social media is that everyone can have an opinion. So yeah, I think it has gotten better. Like I said, I think it's definitely gotten better. People are a bit more refrained with their comments, but yeah, you see it in all sports. I think you saw it recently with supercars. Just people jumping on and have an opinion about something, but they probably wouldn't come and say that to that person's face, but they'll be quite happy to write a social media comment about it, or send them a hate
Mm.
message. And, I just think, a lot of those, and more often than not, those people have their own kids that are saying it, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone, their child seeing what they wrote about, someone they don't even know.
Yeah, 100%. And how do you look after yourself when when you've had those pile-ons in the past? Like, how do you reflect on those times now, and what have you learned going forward with that in terms of preventing yourself going into those spirals, perhaps, or even dealing with imposter syndrome or self doubt?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely don't have it fully figured out, but I'm definitely a lot better than I used to be. Especially in terms of racing. I don't read a lot of comments or stuff like that. I read what people put on my page, and hey, I'm lucky. I've got a lot of great fans, a lot of great supporters. Who comment, lovely things, nice things about, me and the team. But yeah, just ignore it. Usually, I don't read comments on other pages. Don't follow a lot of other pages to even read what people are saying, might be saying about me, or yeah, sort of just try and not give it the time of day that people think that they're going to get out of it. But yeah, and then just realizing that it's usually people forget about it. Usually people get over it after a few days. It's yesterday's news, something else happens. But yeah, I've probably been lucky that I haven't experienced much of it in the last few years. But yeah, no doubt. I think if I went looking hard enough on Facebook, I'd find something about me, about something they disagree with what I've done, or past that I may have done. So yeah, just not really giving it the time of day that it really doesn't deserve, I'd say, is how I do it. And obviously just carrying on with life and realizing that no matter what happens at the track on a Saturday night, I've still got to go to work on Monday, so it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter.
And I believe physical preparations played a big part in how you deal with things as well.
Yes, yeah, big time. Mental health and fitness, I think, goes hand in hand. Yeah, I spent a lot of time in the gym, spent a lot of time running. And the motivation used to be to try and be better in the race car. But now it's more just about making myself feel good, keeping myself feeling nice and refreshed. And yeah, it's definitely, I notice the difference if I don't go and work out versus when I do. When I don't go work out versus when I do, I feel like I'm in a much better mood, a lot more motivated, and just generally enjoy life a lot more, and probably a lot more pleasant to be around.
Yeah, so good. So longer term, Matt, what does it look like for you? Because you've been in the class now for a long time, and I believe you do marketing outside of the racing scene as well. So yeah, maybe talk us through what life looks like outside of racing, and I guess longer term where you see yourself.
Yeah, so yeah, outside the race car, my full time job is marketing communications. So I work for a company called City Gear Property here in Christchurch. So yeah, that's where I spend majority of my week. And yeah, I actually pursued marketing originally to help with sponsorship and stuff like that, help with partnerships to be able to race. As I said, for as long as I remember, I wanted to race cars, and I don't come. A lot of people think I do, but I don't come from a wealthy family or something like that. To get the team to where it is today has been through a lot of hard work, and a lot of good partnerships with good companies that have believed in the vision, and have made it possible. So yeah, that was why I actually first pursued marketing. Yeah, so that's my main career. I've been there for about just over 12 months now. I really enjoy it. I love marketing, even away from motorsport and sponsorship. I enjoy the psychology of it. Try to think on how your target audience thinks, and yeah, I find it really fascinating. So yeah, with my marketing career, just want to keep growing, keep getting better at that. And then in the race car, it sounds weird to ask that what the future holds, but it's pretty simple now that I feel like I've done it for a wee while. Is just enjoy every race like it's my last. It's not going to last forever. I'm really enjoying myself at the moment. I went through a few years there where I probably wasn't enjoying it as much as what I should have been. So yeah, just trying to enjoy every moment. Obviously, it's a very family orientated thing. My father Brent's heavily involved, and my grandfather Royce is heavily involved as well, and he's just turned 80. So just enjoying every moment and trying to make the most of it. And obviously, hey, I really want to win races and do really well. And the ultimate goal is still hasn't been achieved yet. I'd love to be a New Zealand Sprint Car champion. That's probably what keeps me motivated and keeps me going. But other than that, just enjoying it and just trying to enjoy it as much as possible. As people know, life flashes you by really fast. So yeah, just trying to take every moment and appreciate it, and hopefully look back when I am done racing and be proud of what me and the team achieved.
Fantastic. And marketing's enabled you to think more commercially and how to attract sponsors. How important are sponsors to what you do every day?
Oh, they're huge. They're arguably 90% of what we're able to do as a race team. So yeah, I was pretty quick to realize at a young age that if I wanted to race at the level that I wanted to race at, that a lot of it was going to have to be funded through sponsors. And yeah, like you said, learning what companies want, and what they need in order to, put an investment. A lot of people look at sponsorship like it's free money, like a donation. Here's X amount of dollars, go have some fun and slap my logo on the side of your race car. And in reality, it's really not like that. It's about offering something of value and working with them to understand how you can help them and how you can, market their product or their service to your following or your, industry or sport. So yeah, I've definitely been successful in that regard at picking up good partnerships and working with those companies to build long-term relationships. One of my sponsors is WD-40 Australia and New Zealand, and we've been partnered now just on 6 years as one of our major partners, and it's a partnership I'm really proud of because it's all based around value. I don't know anyone at WD-40 that's doing me favors or anything like that. It's purely based on value and what we do for them and how we generate brand awareness and educate people on their product range. So yeah, I actually enjoy that part a lot. The marketing and partnership side of things almost as much as I enjoy, driving a sprint car. Obviously driving a sprint car is a lot more enjoyable. There's not too many feelings. Definitely no feeling of experience like that. But yeah, the marketing and partnership side, I really enjoy. I love working with people and stuff like that. We got a new partner on board last year, VIP Trade and VIP Frame and Trusses. Anyone in Christchurch or, maybe wider South Island would know who the VIP group are. They own a range of different companies, and we got partnered with them 12 months ago, and, that's going really good at the moment. And I'd say, at the moment, this is the best shape our team's been in from a performance standpoint, from a partnership standpoint. And yeah, we just got so many good people that, help make it possible. I tell people all the time, whether they believe it or not, I wouldn't be doing this without sponsorship. It's can be like a second job, the amount of work that goes into making sure that those partners know what we're up to, what we're trying to do, asking them how we can add more value. And it's a total team effort to make it all.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good insight there. It does take a lot to keep people in the loop, and it's a lot more of a consultative approach, right? And I take it you've probably had a lot of rejection throughout this as well.
Yes, that's a great point. Actually, I'll bring up an example. When I first started racing in Auckland, I used to send out emails to businesses with a little bit of a sponsorship, pitch. And I think one year I sent out like over 3,000 emails and didn't get a single sponsorship out of it. Got probably maybe 10 phone calls, 2 meetings, and didn't get anything out of it. So it taught me how hard it was going to be, to try and break through and stuff like that. So yeah, probably the first 5 or 6 years of my sprint car career was emailing companies every off season and trying to get in touch with people, messaging family, friends, asking them if they knew of anyone that would take a meeting with me and go through. And yeah, a lot of rejection at the fact that a lot of companies have been burnt by people. I wouldn't say specifically in motorsport, but we use motorsport as an example that, they'll give a race team sponsorship, they'll give them X amount of dollars, they'll put the name on the car, and then they'll never hear back from that driver or that team until it's time to renew the sponsorship again. That was the biggest thing I noticed early on, is that a lot of companies have actually been burnt, that they're like, hey, I've spent X amount in the past and I never heard anything, or they never did anything that they said they were going to do. They promised the world and didn't deliver. So I made it a commitment from early on that, if I was going to do it, I was going to fulfill if I put down I was going to do this, I was going to do it. And I was going to communicate everything we were doing, where we were racing, almost over communicate at the point where they'd probably some of my sponsors get a little bit sick of hearing from me but I think there's never too much communication when, they're heavily involved in your racing and put in their hard-earned marketing budget, some of their budget, into our team. So yeah, that was the biggest thing I learned. But yeah, the rejection was, the first few no's was quite demoralizing. And you just realize if you don't ask, you don't get. So you just keep asking. But yeah, you sort of learn different ways. Eventually, I realized that networking was going to be the best way to do it. If Fred could open the door to John at XYZ, that was a lot more of an efficient way rather than just sending 3,000 cold emails with a template that you were entering their name. So yeah, it definitely taught me a lot, and the power of relationships, and sort of, I guess it comes back to sometimes it's not what you know, it's who you know. But I don't mean that in a way of, you just naturally know someone. It's just actually networking and meeting people that, hey, John owns a construction company. He really likes motorsport. Maybe he's a good person to go have a chat with. So yeah, it definitely taught me the power of relationships and networking, and just treating people nicely, and just, you never know what's around the corner.
100%. It's a great lesson, not only for sponsorships but for business as well. Like, the amount of, and I've been in a leadership position myself in the work that I do. The amount of emails that you get as a decision maker, people trying to sell you stuff, you get the same style of spiel in an email. Like, you've really got to work hard to make yourself stand out, right? What would be your advice to someone that's coming into the sport or even business that's, trying to get in front of the right people and trying to get their product across the board or get that sponsorship?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think that the best way is to know what you're selling and believe in what you're selling. If you are selling something, believe in what you're selling, and create value. I think that's the biggest thing. If we're talking, advice to another, young kid that wants to race cars and needs sponsorship to do it, learn how to create value and learn how to, take an opportunity that, might not be great. It might be some free product, or it might be, something very minor, and just over deliver. That's the advice. I get occasionally some people hit me up for advice on sponsorship, and I just say to them, you've got to start small, because at the end of the day, you're not going to trust someone with, a sizable amount of money if they've got no runs on the board. If you can say, look, I've been partnered with this company now for, 3 or 4 years, or I've been partnered with you guys for 3 or 4 years, I've done everything that I said I was going to do. How about we try and do this? And that's probably where I've had the most success, is turning very small partnerships into larger ones and just building that trust. And I guess it's the same thing with business. If you've got clients and stuff like that, if they give you, I guess a good analogy would be if you were like a marketing agency and, a customer said, we're going to spend, $500 a month with you. If you can do a lot with that $500 a month, then they're going to believe in you to then throw you the $5,000 a month and the bigger numbers. I think that's the thing, is just build trust, and then do what you say you're going to do. Don't promise something you can't deliver, because that just gets you back to square one, that you're essentially full of shit, and you're just not gonna get to where you want to get to if you can't at least, keep your word.
100%. Great advice. All right, so we're gonna bring the plan into land, so to speak. Who's in your corner no matter what happens? Who are the people that you think really deserve a shout out, that have always got your back?
Probably my mother, without a doubt. Yeah, my mother, Sandra. I think, she's been through it all. She keeps me sane when things aren't going to plan. She's very supportive. I'd say she's probably the unsung hero, especially even on the racing side of things. She consistently supports me. She actually, she'll laugh at me saying this, but she actually doesn't like watching me race, because it actually scares the hell out of her, as I could imagine any mother would with their child. She really doesn't enjoy me going at high speeds and stuff like that. And, if you go on YouTube, you'll see that I've had some pretty big wrecks over the years. But yeah, definitely her. I think, she's always got my back no matter what. And and always willing to defend me no matter what's going on, and always manages to put me in a better mindset, and stuff like that. So yeah, she'd probably be my number one supporter, and yeah, definitely the unsung hero of my life. I think of anything I go to. Yeah, she's always been such a great mother, and very, very fortunate to have her as my mother. So yeah, I'd say definitely she's the unsung hero. And then obviously, my father and grandfather, have been huge in the racing scene for me. Without those two driving the cart behind me, and keeping things going, and making sure I've had the opportunities I've had. None of the success would have been possible without them either. And yeah, so I'd say those are definitely the three key influential people that have my back no matter what. And yeah, I owe pretty much all my success to those three, for keeping me going.
Yeah, amazing, mate. And yeah, you have had some big tumbles, including in front of me. So no wonder you've scared the shit out of her a few times, mate. That's for sure.
She always asks me when it's time to retire, and then when I start talking about next season, she says to me, "So you're racing next season as well?" And then we sort of have a laugh and think, "Yeah, at this stage, yeah, no, it's yeah, no, she's great. She's supportive, even though she would rather me not do it. I think, I think she'll be probably the happiest person when I do decide that enough is enough.
I guess. Well, when all is said and done, which will probably be a long way into the future yet, because you're still a young fella, how do you want people to remember you? Not just as a driver, but as a person.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd like to remember as someone who sort of does things their own way. I don't think I follow the typical, especially from a racing standpoint. I don't follow the typical, racing car driver, that's out there. I was probably one of the first to adopt social media to really promote my racing here in the South Island and around New Zealand. So yeah, I'd like to get some sort of appreciation for probably breaking the norm there. It's become a lot more common now for people to promote on social media. And I'm definitely not saying I was the first, but by any means, but definitely one of the ones to sort of pump it and look for new ideas, and innovate how you promote your sponsors and stuff like that, especially here in New Zealand. We're so far from the rest of the world, obviously. But yeah, I'd say that. And yeah, it's to say I'd like people to see me as a successful sprint car driver. I think it's very subjective. I think, some people would say, I'm very successful, and some people would say, yeah, he's okay. It's probably not the reason why I do it. But yeah, just probably leaving the sport in a better place than I found it, if that makes sense. If I can inspire some drivers to chase their dream in Speedway, and promote their sponsors well, and try to do things a little bit differently than they have been done, I think that would be pretty cool. But yeah, obviously I'd like to be remembered as someone who had success, and someone who did things the right way, someone who raced hard but clean, and raced fair as well. I think that's probably the biggest things I would like to be remembered for when I'm done. And then as a person, to my family, just someone who does what they say they're going to do, someone who's pleasant to be around, someone who's got their back like they have mine. And especially now that I've got a young nephew, just setting a good example for him, and being there for him no matter what, and having his back, and just leading by example, I guess, would be my answer to that question.
Love it. That's great. And so this episode will probably come out sort of mid-January. How does the rest of the season look at the moment? I believe you got a little bit of time off over the Christmas break. And then how does the rest of the season look?
Yeah, so we've got a little bit of time over the Christmas break, and then we get straight back into it on the 8th and 9th of January, down in Cromwell for the New Zealand Sprint Car Championship. So head down south and try chase the title, which should be exciting. I don't really have too many expectations down there. Like I said, it's definitely not one of my best tracks. It's not somewhere where I've raced a hell of a lot, but I'm confident in our package and the speed we have, that hopefully we can go down there and be competitive and give it a red hot shot. And then from there on, we carry on racing with the War of the Wings series. So we go to Greymouth, Greenstone Park, which is probably one of my favourite tracks. So really actually looking forward to that. And then back to Ruapuna after that. And then we have another wee break. And then just, chase the rest of the War of the Wings series through Nelson, Blenheim, Ruapuna, and then a couple of big events in March for the New Zealand Grand Prix, and then back home again for the Gold Cup in April. So yeah, it's not probably as busy as what we usually would be in a season, like as you touched on. we raced a lot, up in the North Island and stuff like that, and done a lot of travel. So this year's sort of been a bit different, a bit of a change of pace. But there'll still be quite a few events on the cards that we'll be doing everything we can to be competitive at those, and hopefully have a really good season.
So, yeah, there's been a lot of change in the North Island there, hasn't it? I guess with everything happening with Western Springs, would that be a key reason why you're spending so much time in the south this year?
Yeah, it was sort of probably the timing. It was probably the timing. The fact that Western Springs is sort of where it is now, it's sort of in limbo at the moment. No one really knows if it's going to ever open again or whether the new speedway at Wakaraka Park is going to be the only place to race open wheel race cars. So yeah, it was sort of part of the reason to scale, back from traveling so much and come back to the South Island. The other part is just spending a little bit more time at home. I spent so many weekends away. Touching on what I said earlier, you sort of start to not enjoy it as much when it becomes, a real mental slog to travel every weekend and go racing. You sort of forget about why you're actually doing it, and that's to have fun. So yeah, sort of just perfect timing for us personally, selfishly. It was the perfect timing for the Western Springs. It just gave us no option really to go back up north. So yeah, it sort of forced us into coming down south, but happy with what we're doing and what the War of the Wings series and what Royal Puna Speedway is doing on a nightly basis was starting to get to the point where we were racing up north, and I was a little bit envious of the events that were happening at Royal Puna and stuff like that, and thought, yeah, I think I really want to be a part of those and spend a bit more time around home. But yeah, looking forward to probably the following season doing a bit more travel and doing a North Island trip or two. And I really enjoy racing around the country and at different tracks. We have a lot of good supporters up north, so it's a bit sad that we don't get to race in front of them this season. So yeah, definitely we try and pride ourselves on being a sort of a national team that travels around and visits a few different tracks throughout the year. It's good for our partners. It's good for the team to get around, and some of the best trips we have are away from home. They're a lot of fun. With a few beers afterwards, and you sort of get to bond like that.
That's great. Awesome, man. Well, it sounds like you're in a really good place, and yeah, thanks so much for being so generous with your time. There's some great little gold nuggets all through this that I think people will get great value from, whether they're doing their racing or sports or even in business as well. I think that part you highlighted around the sponsorship and delivering value that was fantastic. So yeah, thanks again for doing this, mate. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me on. Like I said, it's been a while since my last podcast appearance. So when you sent me that message, I was like, yeah, no, I'm definitely keen to get on. Obviously learning what your podcast was about, I thought there's some good stories to tell there with the heartbreaks that you go through in racing and life and stuff like that, and the triumphs at the end of it if you keep on slogging it out. And yeah, so no, thank you for having me on. I was a bit blown away when I got the message from you that you wanted to have me on. I thought, yeah, no, that's really cool. So no, I appreciate you wanting to have a chat.